Welcome back to the Mothers-in-Law, where we shine a light on strong women, professionals, and celebrate that being a mom and being good at both is more than okay. It's heroic. I'm your host, Carrie, and today we are diving into a conversation that's educational, eye-opening, and a little disruptive. Our guest is Dr. Dana Sumpter, Associate Professor at Pepperdine Business School and a leading researcher on working mothers. She's interviewed dozens of moms about their experiences during COVID, written for Harvard Business Review, and just published a landmark study on what really happens when mothers return to work after maternity leave. So buckle in. This episode is about myths that trap us, invisible labor that drains us, and the micro moves that can transform workplaces and homes. By the end, you'll see that you, the listener, can be the hero in this story.
Welcome to The Mothers-in-Law, a podcast exploring the demanding world of being a mother and a lawyer. Join my mom, Carrie Fogliani, as she shares real-life stories and practical tips to help you find joy and balance in your life. Let's embark on this journey of community and support together. This show is sponsored by General Counsel West, a law firm that supports companies transforming healthcare comprised of mothers and fathers practicing law.
Well, Dana, thank you so much for joining us today. And, before we get into your research, which I really can't wait to talk more about, I just wanted to pause and hear a little bit more about your personal journey on being a professional and then becoming a mom and what that was like for you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carrie. We're really happy to be here talking with you about this. And let me just say, I think it's so funny because I oftentimes feel like such a total fraud or imposter when I talk about these topics and kind of best practices, helping about working mothers and work-life balance, because I am far from perfect myself, right? Like I make all the mistakes. I still continue to struggle with things on the daily. So just want to get that out there to be very
I love that authenticity.
but it really, so my professional, first of all, I've always been someone who loves to work. It's always been a hard worker, love having jobs, feeling useful, doing work, accomplishing things. So I've been working since I was old enough to legally be able to do so. I've always really loved people. I studied psychology in my undergrad. And I got my master's in HR right away afterwards, not knowing what the heck I wanted to do with this psych degree, and studied human resources. And that was kind of the natural, synthesis of people and work and people and business. And so I was increasingly motivated at that time in my life and my career to really want to make work better for people. I saw that as kind of my why. Like I wanted to see how I could help make workplaces better. And for a while, I did that in my career as an HR professional. But in my years working in financial services and HR, I was kind of like, I feel like this is not what I was put on this earth to do. There were just things about the job, the occupation, the industry, and all of that there was a lot that I liked. There's a lot that just didn't feel like a fit. And I felt like there's more that I need to do here in this world. And so I made a big change and I quit my job, went back to get my PhD. Another part of why I made that change, I will say, is that I was single at the time. I was living in New York City. I was an expatriate over in Asia. I kind of had this really, really awesome career. But I always knew in the back of my head, I wanted to be a mom. I've oldest sister, oldest kid on the block I grew up in, oldest of 10 cousins. I always loved taking care of everybody else. So I knew in my heart of hearts, I was going to be a mom someday, just kind of waiting for the right partner at the right time. And I worked and I traveled, got my PhD. And then it was right when I was about to start my professor job out here in Southern California that I met my husband. I was in my 30s and I was eager to kind of get started with the family. Luckily, he was on board. And so, it was very early in my professor career. I was an assistant professor trying to get tenure when I had my first two babies in 2014 and 2016. So it was at that time in my life and my career that I would say my work-life balance was probably at its absolute worst. It's like toddler and baby, tenure track, research pressure, lots of teaching. Oh, by the way, I have a husband too, who I tended to neglect more than I should have. And we could talk about that more too.
Yes.
But, so not stellar work-life balance, but I still look back. It's like, I loved motherhood and I love motherhood down to my bones. And so I think that's a big reason why, as I kind of kept pursuing my research, which originally my career was more on organizational behavior, how people work together, exchange and feel energy and power and empowerment, and these topics that I still care about. But I shifted more to try to explore how can we find out more about working mothers, working parents, and also just caregivers more
Yeah.
generally, and how we can help to support and know from an organization and management perspective, how can we have these practices and policies in place to best support them? And as individuals and employees, how can we know what are the right, drivers for helping us achieve all the goals across all the domains in our life. So that's a little bit about me and kind of
It's
why I got
amazing. It's amazing. And honestly, like when I was first introduced to you, and I just was blown away because like I'd never heard of anybody taking the time, making it their passion to focus and fixate on working moms and what this experience is like. So I just was so thrilled that you were willing to come on and share. And one of my curiosities was, especially given your background in organizational focus, was there like a moment when kind of the light bulb went off when you kind of had that realization of like, I want to focus my research on working moms and what this experience is like? Did you have kids when that happened? Was it watching yourself? Is there a crystallization that you were just, this is my thing?
Oh, I love that question, Carrie. Thank you. First of all, you made my day by those kind words. I'm far from the only one who is studying this stuff these days, which is really one of the optimistic notes that I'll share about. But there's lots of other great scholars doing work in this area and related areas. But what you just described, in qualitative research, we refer to as flashbulb moments.
Okay.
Are there these flashbulb moments that you feel, looking back, really made a change, like motivated you to make a pivot and do something different, or a wake-up call, however you want to call it? So for me, a couple different flashbulb moments come to mind. One is when I was negotiating my maternity leave with a former administrator, and I was just told some very ungracious things in that meeting. And I felt like I was disempowered in that meeting. And I'll never forget how I felt. It's kind of like you forget how people said to you, you'll never forget how they made you feel. I will never
100%.
forget how they made me feel. I thought, this power dynamic should be very different here. And what I have to offer to this organization is clearly not being valued in how I'm being treated in this conversation. And that stuck with me. So that really, really drove some of my pursuant behaviors and also research interests. A second flashbulb moment was when I was in labor with my first child, the labor that took 2.5 days. It was during the early stages of that labor process that I got a call from a co-author who was asking me about a decision that needed to be made on a research paper we were working on together. And I told this co-author I was in labor, and still they were trying to get information out of me about this revision. And I was like, oh my gosh, how do you not understand that I'm in labor right now? Just no clue, no understanding, no acknowledgement. And that experience stuck with me because I remember feeling how disconnected this person was from the reality of what I was experiencing, and just kind of disrespected, and just all kinds of those yucky feelings. So I thought too, like, we need to tell more of the story about what these experiences are like. So not only with birth, of course, but what comes before that, what comes after that, and just try to help folks have more of an understanding that when their coworkers are going through these different phases of what we call the maternal phase, there needs to be an acknowledgement of that, like the serious
baseline. That's a baseline aspect of that, because that is so it's alarming to anyone that's not a mom, but it happens so often. Like it happens so often, and I applaud you for triggering those and like taking them into action, because you could have definitely just been irritated or become a victim, right? That's a choice, or creating a path to, quite honestly, impact so many women. And these untold stories is exactly what this podcast has exposed for me. And I didn't realize it. And it's been so tender sitting with women to hear that story and how hard it is still to this day. And what your research has uncovered, and I love that you focused on the pandemic. So I do kind of want to go back, even though my blood pressure went up when I was reading your articles. And I was like, wow, we survived that. But to highlight how hard it was. And I was just curious if that research kind of what that was born out of. I mean, living through it, or was there a specific experience that really shifted your thoughts as a researcher and a mom to say, this is the thing that needs to be uncovered?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, that I really appreciate you sharing how it made you feel reading. Like it is kind of triggering, right, to be brought back to that time. Because yeah, when I was, and I'll go back to the wine in a second, but it just reminded me of how during those interviews, right? So I interviewed 54 women. My co-author and I, Mona Zanhor, we interviewed 54 women, working mothers who worked at home with kids at home during COVID and the lockdowns. Then interviewed them again a few years later, had some survey data, so all kind of longitudinal data collection with them. And those interviews, they made us laugh. They made us cry. They
Yeah.
made us think. I mean, I can't tell you the range of emotions I felt during those interviews, because not only it connected with my experience, because I went through a lot of, chaos, as we all did during that time. My kids were, in like kindergarten and preschool at the time. So those young ages at home. But also I realized how I was far from the only one,
Oh yeah.
and that how prevalent,
Oh, I know.
this the chaos, the struggles, the challenges, the misidentification, the assumptions made, and all on and on and on. So there's so much nuance to that whole
Totally.
experience. That was, my co-author and I at the time thought, how the heck can we make the time to study this right now? Because we're in
That's a
the
great
trenches
question.
ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whew, that was a lot. But we also were like, how can we not do this? Because we believe these women's stories need to be told.
Yeah.
This needs to be captured.
And I'm
This is
sure
like
that,
alarm bells going off.
yeah. I mean, and I'm
Mm,
sure that even just by your outreach to ask these questions made them feel less isolated. I think that's another aspect of research that I know it's so hard and what you're expected to produce and those interviews, how important they were. But I bet you, like, if someone had called me in the midst of that and just asked me 5 questions that forced me to ponder how hard it was, and then knowing other people were experiencing that, like, it was a very lonely time as a working mom. And I'm sure that that's probably uncovered. And I'd be curious if there's a story from your research that really sticks with you to express that devastation, quite
mm.
honestly. If there's a person that really, because I even, I'd be curious if there's one person that you thought of like, oh, that woman had a really hard time.
Oh, yeah. Well, God, there's so many that come to mind. I mean, I
I
could
know.
go on for a while. That could be a whole other episode.
I know.
But
I
I'll share a couple things that come to mind, right? One is, and actually to go back and respond to your earlier question
Yeah.
about what really drove this study, in addition to my co-author and I, both being just personally inspired by it, was that I remember one time period, one experience when my daughter was in kindergarten trying to homeschool on Zoom and her laptop in her room. My husband was in another room on a Zoom call, and he was unfamiliar with Zoom, so he was asking me for
Oh
questions.
yeah.
My daughter was asking me for questions because something was going on with her Zoom. I was supposed to be on a work call and a department meeting call, so I was logging in from my phone to that in one ear. And then my son, who was a toddler at the time, preschool, was bouncing off the walls and
Yeah.
needed something as well. So I had like every person in my life, every domain coming at me in all these different directions. And I remember just stopping and it's kind of like during a wedding when you're encouraged, like just stop and soak it in for a moment. And it's like,
Mhm.
I stopped and realized this is untenable.
Yeah.
We are asking the impossible of working parents during this time, and especially working mothers, because
Definitely.
they tended to take on more of the workload during that time. And so that to me was like a kick in the butt, saying
Mhm.
like
Yeah. Oh, you do
you have to
this.
do
Yeah.
something about this. You have
There's
to try to
no
help.
choice. There's no
Yes,
choice. Yeah.
exactly. So that was it.
No.
And then, gosh, from the data, there were, some of the specific instances that really stand out to me in terms of really representing the untenable nature, but also why there are so many layers to what was being experienced that we didn't see as much in the popular
Mhm.
press and in articles and
Yeah.
things like that. And that is how unbelievably committed these women were to their jobs and how much they cared about
Oh,
still doing well in their jobs at this time, even when they've got the kids and the partner and the chores and
yeah.
house stuff, and let alone public health guidelines. And we're
Oh.
hearing stuff from city, state, county, national, federal,
Ah,
and we're supposed to interpret,
I'm getting
like, can I go outside of my house? Like,
yeah.
can I go grocery shopping? Stuff
No,
like that
it's
became life and death decisions. And it's like
yeah.
these women, amidst all of that, they still were absolutely sacrificing themselves and their self-care and their well-being to get their jobs done.
It's
Um, yeah,
and
that was
like you bring it back in, and it's I was a healthcare attorney with my husband was a first grade teacher. We had 3 kids that were in like third grade, first in kindergarten. And I do remember sitting in my kitchen. He's in the other room on a Zoom going butterfly with first graders. I have a general counsel on my phone, and all my kids come in, and they asked that they were gentlemen, and they said, "Can't you get your kids under control?" And I paused the Zoom. I went in the other room and I cried because I was like, "This is impossible." So I think that your recognition of the impossibility of it, I wish I knew you then, because just to share that, even someone just to say that out loud. So, and I think your research goes so deep into really, I think, giving us a recognition of
Yeah.
what was hard about it, but also hope in that we weren't alone in it, right? Even just retrospectively. Um, but looking through what you guys found in those interviews, sort of what are the key things that, not that there's hopefully ever another pandemic, but the ideas and concepts that were real clear recommendations for sort of making this better for mothers in the future?
Yeah. Oh, a few things come to mind. First is that, which by the way, one of the codes that came out from our analysis was empathy ran out.
Mhm.
That for the first month, couple months, few months after the lockdowns, there was a lot of empathy for,
Mhm.
okay, oh, you got your kids in the background. I get it. Things are so
Yeah.
hard. But as the months went by, the empathy ran out.
Oh,
Yet the challenges and the
they were still
realities
there.
still remain. They're still there,
Yeah. They're
but
still there.
others were not as tolerant. And
Yeah.
again, us in this boxed position here. So, first thing that really stood out is the changing of priorities that we heard from so many of our participants. Um, I have totally reconfigured my priorities in my life, and whereas I used to care about getting to the next level, or I used to
Mm.
care about always being perceived as the person who said yes, or I cared about the FaceTime I put in at work
Oh,
without extra hours at the office. I realize now I am not willing to sacrifice anymore
yeah.
for that. Like that's no longer as high of a priority for me. So it was really this interesting phenomenon of women kind of reshifting and rebalancing their priorities. And it wasn't always about deprioritizing work and increasing
Mm-hmm.
prioritization of kids and family. Like it was different for
Yeah.
everybody.
That's
That was
interesting.
another thing that came out too. Like no one size fits all way that
Mm.
this was either approached and handled in the midst of all the turmoil, or how it has unfolded in the months and years afterwards
Yeah.
since then. So a lot of variety. And that I'll actually align that with some of the research I've done on post maternity leave as
Okay. Okay.
well. So
Mm-hmm.
returning back to work, returning
Yeah.
back to the job after being out on maternity leave, however short or long it may have been. And that is the shifting around of priorities. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to have my office door open because I need to be ruthlessly efficient in how I
Yeah.
get my job
Yeah.
done,
Yeah.
or and so on and so forth. So all that to say, I think whenever there's, and just more broadly, right, this is how I think it could be applied to future
Yeah.
crises, change, transitions. There's going to be a reckoning, right, with what's really
Mm.
important. And so I think that what working mothers can do is really use that time for them, right, with their
Yeah.
own rules and what they care about and what their external context is looking like, to really make positive changes that will help their work-life balance be more workable in the future. Because that's the thing with work-life balance, is that it's always changing. It's not like it's this ultimate goal where it's like, oh, I've
Yeah.
achieved work-life
Yeah.
balance, I'm
Yeah.
at
No.
pinnacle.
There's.
No. Then all of a sudden, baby goes through a developmental phase and stops sleeping, or work crisis happens and throws your regular schedule into disruption, and on, right? There's always change.
Totally.
There's always ups and downs. And so all that to say that it's really the journey, not a destination. And
Mm.
so we have to capitalize on times of change or transitions or anything that can kind of disrupt what's a normal schedule or set of priorities, to be proactive and purposeful in how you're going to build the new vision for yourself, in a way that can work for you and make your life sustainable.
Yeah, and I think like sustainability is a critical theme that I've been exploring with a lot of the women that have been on the podcast. I think, and predominantly I've spoken with attorneys who are in these very intense environments, and sometimes that priority setting, it's still perceived as limiting.
Yeah.
And I think, you're right. One of the questions that a lot of women had to answer is it more important for me to achieve higher levels of growth professionally at the same time when I'm trying to feel great about my mothering? So is there any sort of, in that reprioritization process, I mean, I think that's sort of one of the things or themes that I've heard you share about in the past is managers' involvement and what they can do to outreach and ask when
Mhm.
they're seeing a working mom, because it's really hard,
Yeah.
especially in my industry, I think, for us to ask
Yes.
and raise that as even a topic immediately feels like failure. So,
Yes,
any,
because what is that signaling? That's signaling weakness, that's signaling, or there's the fear, right? That's
yeah,
signaling weakness, or I can't do it, or I give up. And in many industries, especially highly masculinized industries, in more cutthroat industries, that is not culturally appropriate. That could be
yeah,
career limiting or career
right.
killing in some cases. So there's just such risk with that. So that's why, again, like, this really depends on so many different variables, right? It
I know.
depends on the nature of your relationship with the manager, right? Like, what's your
Absolutely.
relationship with them? Is there
Oh,
trust? Is there
right.
understanding? Has this manager been there? Do they get it? Like, that's a big thing that's come out in a couple different studies is if the manager has at all recently had kids or,
Yeah,
currently
no,
has
it's
younger kids,
so essential.
yeah, they
So
may have a
essential.
clue as to what you're going through and be supportive. If the manager, but even if the manager has kids, let's say they have a spouse, let's say a
Right.
wife
Yeah.
that did all the work,
Right.
then I've heard again and again in data sets like, oh, well, they've told me, why can't your partner do it? Or why can't you, like, it's not even on their radar
Right.
screen what the day-to-day life is like in terms of juggling all the responsibilities. So also if someone has had kids, but they're older,
They
then they very
forget
well may
it.
have forgotten,
Yeah, it's
how hard it
amazing.
is. And again, the day to day, and especially in the current context, which is different compared to decades past. So all that to say that if you do have a manager or leader who is, who is aware, acknowledges the reality of what you're going
Um,
through, cares,
yeah.
is willing to accommodate, is willing to provide some flexibility, then that gives you a little bit more openness to be able to be transparent about what your needs are and to raise your hand and ask for help when you need it.
And yeah,
Yeah.
even to
Okay.
stay in, like, because I think a lot of the themes I've heard from women is they leave or they're
Yeah.
about to leave or they've
Oh, yeah.
contemplated leaving. I'm talking about like brilliant legal minds in our industry sat and thought about leaving the profession
Yes.
because there wasn't that type of managerial support. And I think what I have tried to message out to anyone listening that is a manager is to ask, because we aren't, we're stubborn, some of us, and have all these notions about what asking for help looks like. And I do want to share, like, I've been super blessed with an incredible male partner now who at our firm. And one of my favorite things he did recently when I was having just a hard mom time is I'd been actually sick the week before, and I canceled a call and said I'm not feeling well, and he called me right up and said, "You're not sick, are you?" In the most loving way. I'm like, "I'm not. I'm just having a really hard mom day." And we talked it
Mm.
out. But it was so impactful to have someone that I trust so much. He was only reaching out in the best of ways, and we
Yeah.
were able, he's like, "What can I take off your plate? What works better?"
Right.
And that
Yeah.
is impactful. And I feel like that makes a difference.
And that was all over our data in that the
Mm,
women who did have managers who were empathetic like that, and
mm,
not just empathy in terms of like, let me, tell me what's going on,
mhm.
checking in, showing caring, but following up with the tactical support. What can I
Yeah.
do to help lighten your workload? How can we adjust your schedule so that you can make that morning drop off less stressful? I
Oh,
mean, that
yeah.
magic combination had very tangible outcomes, including most prominently, I am so committed to this employer now. I liked my job before, but now because I'm getting this support
I
when I
know.
need it the most, when I'm most desperate for it, I will work my butt off for
Right.
this person. Like,
The
that
level of
is such a
gratitude.
strong
I mean,
response.
yes, it's so true. And it's so interesting because it's not always about the money. It's not even about the hours, but it's about that's
Yeah,
sustainable. And I
yeah,
think, real accomplishment of that. Even yesterday, we were on a call, and one of my colleagues, who's the hardest working, amazing, brilliant lawyer, asked, "Hey, is this call going to end by X? Because I need to pick my kids up." And I loved that because there was nothing apologetic about that, because we
yeah.
are support that. And I think the more we can create environments where that empathy goes into the tactical, I love how you stated that. That means something to people. And I
Yeah.
think you will get people to stay longer and to work harder.
But it's on the shoulders of women and other allies, right? Male
Yeah,
allies who are on board with that to help to normalize that.
I
Because not every woman could say that in the meeting.
I
right?
know.
Earlier, like we know from research on career stages, like if you're earlier in your career or if you've made a change and you're new to an organization or new to a profession, you don't necessarily have the safety to be able to be honest about those non-work needs that someone who's more established, has, reputation, has, longer tenure and so on
Mhm.
has. There's the threat of ideal work norms, right? Where
Right, I
it
love
is,
that. I'd love to share more about that for people that aren't aware of it, kind of
yes,
where that came from, the ideal
it's
work
so
norm.
huge, Carrie. And once I started learning about this, I was like, oh my gosh, I started seeing it everywhere.
Oh
I
gosh,
know
okay.
so it's this image that centers on devotion to work, right? That the ideal worker is one that is always available for their job, that never says no, that is, deprioritizes other aspects or
Mm,
parts of their life for work, and that is a notion that is very much assumed in
mm,
many industries and occupations, especially here in the US. And so what happens though, I mean, like just like human behavior, what employees tend to do, which we know
mm,
from research now and what's called passing or masking, is that not everyone is the exact ideal worker, but there's a lot of kind of pretending or acting as if and kind of masking what's
imposters.
going on
Yeah.
behind the curtain
Mhm.
while pretending to be the ideal worker. And not like research, like women do this, men do this too. Everyone
Yeah,
does this.
yeah,
Um, but what happens is there are certain groups who are more stigmatized as not meeting that
okay.
ideal worker image. And so oftentimes it's, groups who are not as represented in an organization or in an industry, which is different depending on what type of space you're talking about. But working mothers are certainly subject to
Mhm.
that, just that type of discrimination or those types of assumptions, right? The stereotyping really is what we're talking about. So, okay, working mother, because you now have kids, now I'm
Yeah,
going to perceive you totally differently. I'm going to perceive you as
really.
not as committed, as not as devoted to work, as not as willing to raise your hand. And in fact, I'm going to maybe assume you're not going to raise your hand. And I'm just going to go ask this next person for that, to take on that client or to
Mm,
travel or to go to that conference or whatever. Cause I'm going to assume you're too busy with the kids. You don't want to. So this is
yeah.
what systematically ends up disenfranchising women and their opportunities.
Ugh. No, I mean, we definitely have seen it. I mean, I've seen it improve over time. And I do one friend shared recently that, in an interview, one of her friends was asked, "Are you planning to have a family?" Like straight up, and did
Oh
not
no!
get the job.
Oh
This was years
gosh!
ago.
You made
This
my
was years
heart
ago.
explode.
I know, but
Illegal!
this I know. Well,
Illegal!
and that was before it was illegal, quite honestly. It was before it was illegal, but the
Oh,
fact that that was even part of the conversation, it kind of goes to all those assumptions that you were sharing about.
yeah.
It's a
Well, that's why.
really tricky.
Yeah.
I know. It's
Yeah.
really it's just alarming though that we still are
Yeah.
confronted with that because in my experience, like the mothers that I've worked with are the hardest working women, and they're able to um, work through and set boundaries in a healthy way. I've learned from them how to say, oh,
Mhm.
yes, I can do that, but it'll be done tomorrow by this time versus
Mhm.
rushing to please that day and exhaust
Mhm.
yourself. And so I think like encouraging, and especially in our fast paced world, especially with COVID, where everything was expected in the impossible, but immediately. And
Mhm.
it's interesting that your study, instead of that kind of fading away, it became more entrenched in which that kind of blew my mind a little bit because I think I was more um, thinking it would be the empathy aspect would sort of
Mhm.
deflate those expectations. But was that a surprising output of your study, or were you just like, of course?
It really is such an interesting question because I remember going through a lot of ups and downs through as we were analyzing the data and proceeding to go through the pandemic ourselves, right? I
Right.
mean, we were
That's the
going
thing.
through it
You're like
ourselves
building the plane and
simultaneously.
flying it. I love that
Yeah,
though.
exactly. Yeah. So it was surprising to a certain extent because similarly, we had thought and hoped that we would find more evidence of like empathy, support, and all this stuff to try to help that folks would be more concerned about helping each other get through instead of just slamming with more expectations and let's get back to normal as soon as possible without recognizing, and this again was a driver for the study, that we were at a period of time there in a broader social context where we realized we were going to be building this new normal, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
And none of us, 2020, 2021, even 22, none of us knew how the norms were going to settle in terms
Yeah.
of work arrangements, in terms of work-life balance, in terms of employee-employer power relations, which that power
Mhm.
dynamic has really gone back and forth when you really look at more like economics data and labor statistics data. So there's been a lot of swings back and forth with all of those issues. And I don't know if we've really landed yet on what kind of
Yeah.
the new
It's
normal
still
is, what it
emerging.
will be.
Yeah.
It's still emerging. Remote hybrid questions haven't been answered. So, but we have a lot more data now than we once did,
Yeah.
right? So we can at
No.
least like start making these decisions in more of an evidence-based way, which we hope will be helpful. But here's the thing. One of the big things that came up was with regards to support is that something that really made these working mothers feel either like I am not at the right employer, or I'm going
Mhm.
to make a change, or I'm going to leave, or I'm going to work less, or something like that, is in what we captured as inauthentic support.
Mm.
So when there
Wow.
was, hey, we have these online virtual Zoom session for how to do chair massage or chair yoga, or we're gonna have chips in the break room when the days that we're back in the office, or these kind of feel goody things that
Yeah.
it's kind of like superficial support that's not really helping the real problems that people
Right.
are
Right.
experiencing. And participant after participant was like, I don't want this fake crap support.
Yeah.
I want less work, or I need
I
a
don't
more
need
manageable
chips.
schedule,
I don't
or I
need
need a
chips.
reduced workload. I don't need chips in the break room,
Yeah.
right?
I'm
So that
good.
was like something that came out.
It's so interesting. I think a part of it, I mean, was I always was curious in that time because we work with a lot of clients that were in companies, like who was coming up with what would help, and maybe they were not relying on the right resources to really understand. But I think unless your study, which would have been impossible for pandemic risk reasons, to come into my house to
Mhm.
help assess what I needed, and I have a very awesome Italian mother who called me one day, and I was running the firm at this point, and everybody's kids were home, and all these women are amazing and doing all this hard work. She said, I know, you know what you need to do? You need to get all these kids back to school. I'm like, wow, mom, that is really an awesome solution. Okay. But if somebody was
Amen.
listening, yeah, let's do that. And that'd be really helpful. But those were
Oh
the kinds
god.
of solutions that would have been great, not chips. But I think that's
Yeah.
fascinating that these, what do you call them, inauthentic support,
Yes. Yes.
even looking today beyond a pandemic environment, I think some of the policies and things that have become available are not actually right sized to
No.
support mothers to succeed um, in the workplace as much as they're intended to. I do think the intent's there. I do. I believe in the best of people. I think there's a real clear recognition of the value of mothers in the workplace. I'm a much better lawyer because I'm a mom. Like, I feel like it has enhanced so many strategic and logistical and intellectual aspects of my being. And I feel a lot of moms feel the same way. I think we share that.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. All
but
the
it doesn't
above.
mean that it wasn't easy, in that experience. Because sometimes, and this is a trickier question, but with all these policies and this inauthentic support, do you ever think that, this is sort of a conspiracy theory question, that the real hope is that we step back, that we
Oh,
don't
I think
engage?
in some organizations, absolutely. That
Mm,
is, it goes like, hey, you can either
yeah.
meet these exceedingly high standards, or else, sorry, clearly
Mm,
not cut up for it. So it can be a way of passive turnover,
yeah.
right? Kind of encouraging what's called passive turnover. Um, but all that to say that, as you mentioned, all the advantages, this again is where I think if I were working at a place where I felt like, are they just setting me up for failure?
Mm,
Or are they holding me, and everyone perhaps, but are they holding us to these standards that are just not able to be realized, or are really, really hard for anyone who doesn't who doesn't meet that ideal
yeah.
worker norm image? Maybe this isn't the place I want to be, right? I
Yeah.
mean, maybe,
Right.
like this is my trigger to start looking elsewhere, which obviously is easier said than done and is not an option for many people. And so that doesn't make it right, certainly. But the hope is that, you look at talent labor market is a labor market
Yeah.
where there is a reason why we make choices in where we choose to work and where we would never choose to work.
Right.
And so I think collectively, if there was an understanding that, hey, employer, if you're going to have these draconian policies or these unfair expectations or any of that, or toxic work culture and all of that, that means that you are going to have a shriveled labor pool to draw
Right.
your attention
Right.
from.
It's
You
very
miss out
limited.
on all these other
Oh my
potentially
gosh.
fabulously talented people that could be contributing, that, by the way, your competitors are going to be picking up.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you triggered on one of my questions for you was around the invisible labor concept, because that was another one that, I was curious, what that really means and why it's so damaging when it goes like unseen.
Yeah. Oh, it's huge. It is huge. That I think that term, when I first heard it, I was like, oh, that's it. You've captured it, right? It's
Yeah.
the cognitive work, the executive functioning work that goes into managing a household. I had some participants, I remember, refer to it as being the house CEO or something like that.
Yeah.
But yet the
Totally.
unpaid version, right? The
Yes.
unpaid version of the
Very
house
unpaid.
CEO. So luckily there's a decent amount, there's a decent amount of research on this now. So
Okay.
it's captured. There's a way we measure it. There's an acknowledgement that this is a part of
This.
a parenting
Yeah.
workload or a family workload, that it affects relationships, it affects ability to perform one's job well, it affects well-being and so on, because fundamentally we all want to be valued for the work that we do. And
I know.
so we may get recognition in things at work, we get recognition for things that are more explicit, but this type of cognitive invisible work is totally unnoticed unless you're the one doing it.
Right.
So unless you're patting yourself on the back,
And
that
there's no
means that
padding.
you
But I feel
value
like,
it.
I struggle because a lot of, women, working moms that I'm friends with, they don't feel empowered to like renegotiate that once you're in it. Because sometimes I feel like it's a slow creep. Like no one notices it at first. And then all of a sudden, it's 90-10% as far as your partner. And I don't
Yeah.
know how that happened. And unwinding it's, even for me, seems untenable. But I'm just curious, like if you have any
Yeah.
tips or suggestions around how to reshift that and make it less invisible. Like, I guess I don't know.
Yeah. That, so a colleague of mine at Pepperdine, Bobby Thomason, she has this great Harvard Business Review article. It's
Okay.
titled something like, Stop Expecting Women to Have an Equal Partner, or Stop
Yes.
Telling Women They Should Have an Equal Partner,
Yeah.
or 50-50. Because she's like, the whole premise of that is ridiculous. But
Yes.
oftentimes that's the solution that's put out for how we mothers especially can be able to balance things better. It's like, well, why isn't your partner doing more? It's like, well, in many cases, that is not an option.
Right.
For what would be many, many different reasons.
Yes.
And so we can't ask that of others. We can't assume our own values or assumptions or our own experiences in other people, because every household is different. Every
Right.
relationship is different. And so unequal partnerships, I think one of our main points was like, they aren't always foreseeable or easy to avoid. And so we can't blame women. We have to resolve to give them more support when they have what might not be
More
perfect
needs
at home.
Yeah.
And so I know one part of this too, actually, which came out from our research, which is really interesting and that we didn't expect, is the nature of in this case, the husbands. So 53 out of 54 of our participants had male partners and husbands. The nature of the husband's job had a profound impact on the extent to which the mom was able to go about doing her job and also attend to the home and family needs. Right. So we went in thinking like we need to ask about the partner stuff, but we didn't realize how important the nature of the partner's job was.
Yes.
So if the husband was working outside the home, like if he was a healthcare provider, or if his job demanded a lot of synchronous on like video on meetings. And so there were so many circumstances where, especially during like the home or the tolerance for the blending of work and family needs with work meetings and things like that. So like, is it more or less okay for me to have the kid jump on my lap when I'm on a video call?
Right.
Then the dad having a kid jump on the lap on the video call.
Yeah.
So that differed widely across our sample. And it was so interesting because what that meant, especially for folks who were homeschooling, had elementary school age kids at home, is that this is like one example that we saw replicated again and again, is that the mom sitting at the kitchen table with the kids while they're homeschooling. They're all on their laptops. Mom's right next to the kids. So she's available for help. Oh, something happened with my Zoom link. Here's a question. Isn't that? While dad is in a separate room, other side of the house, separate office, closed door, whatever it is, he's able to focus and concentrate on his job. But mom has to constantly be multitasking, talk about cognitive load, invisible labor, and so on. not
all
really
at once.
recognize how hard it is, but our brains are not meant to work that way. And we're certainly not going to work productively that way. So the moms were continuously disadvantaged in not all of our sample. There were definitely exceptions, but in most of our sample, it was more like that.
And it's hard because you said disadvantage, but also I remember just being so disappointed in myself that I could not do this. Like it was hard, and how to rise above and through it, because it was also, ironically, as a working parent, a very precious time
Yes.
when all your kids were in the same place all day. And I get it, it can get overwhelming and annoying, but I did make myself step back to recognize that this unit and this time and space of us all being in the same space all day long, all night long, was something to try to enjoy,
Yes.
versus feeling
Yes.
disappointed. Like it was a very complex
Totally.
experience,
Totally.
especially when you
And
have
there was
young.
actually,
Yeah, no, go ahead. I'd like to hear that.
yeah, yeah. No, I was going to say that was actually a really wonderful and unexpected part of our analysis. Also, was we had this code called silver linings, where
Hmm.
so many women touched
Yeah.
on that, like
Mm. Yeah.
because a lot of it was I'm stressed, I'm not
Yeah.
sleeping, I'm overwhelmed, I'm overloaded, this and that every day. So, but there are just these wonderful, precious moments. My family is going on bike rides together.
Yeah.
We never used to do that before. I was there for my daughter's first steps, or I was there for her
Oh,
first word. I wouldn't
right.
have been there if she had
Yeah.
been with
Oh, that's
a
beautiful.
daycare while I'm working. And so I was there for all the firsts. I mean, so many stories like that. So
So
it was an
powerful.
incredibly
Yeah.
complex time. But again, it's like I hope that from what we bring out from that time and these years later, it's like, how can we retain the emphasis and prioritizing that, right? And that doesn't mean like, hey, I'm always going to be deprioritizing work so I can be around for those precious moments. But like, how can I make choices about
Yeah.
when I work, where I work, who I work for, that can
Right.
accommodate my ability to be able to retain that part of it?
Right. Honestly, like my plea is that we create more environments that make that possible for people, because I think that is the struggle that I really am noticing more and more in through just talking with women who've gone through that. And I think like I do want to make sure, I mean, I'm super also impressed with your, Harvard Business Review study, and I want to make sure we create time for that, because, that transition is like so pivotal in the in every mom's experience. And I have a very, one of the stinging mom moments, and I had my dream job when I got pregnant with my son, and I had asked if I could work remote. This is way before COVID. Work remotely 2 days a week, because I was driving 3 hours a day to my job, and the answer was no.
Mhm.
And it was crushing, because it was like a place that I would give my left arm to work at. And but it pivoted me into creating a firm that is 100% behind parents practicing law and creating all the things that I'm desiring for everybody else. That's like my passion, my mission. So it worked out, but I do remember like going back into those conversations, and I just would love to hear more about your research in this space and sort of what you learned and how it can be better for people, coming into that part of their life.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And that example is exactly, I mean, that was a very important finding, I think, that has come out of not only some of my work, but that of others. There's this great research article by Villamore et al. That it was titled something along the lines of "Virtuality is a Double-Edged Sword."
Mm,
Right,
that's
that we have to be
yeah.
so careful with flexible work arrangements, remote and hybrid work, and so on, especially we women, especially we working
Yeah.
mothers who are already kind of stigmatized in a way for being insufficiently committed, and who have all of these different ceilings and walls that we're battling against and trying to grow our careers. By the way, the best one I heard of lately is the glass ceiling for women who don't play
What
golf.
what is oh,
Like the
well,
glass
that
ceiling,
yeah.
this wall, no, the
I love
grass
it.
ceiling
Okay.
is
Oh my
included,
god.
right? All these always new ways that we can be excluded. So what that means is it, flexibility and remote work is a wonderful advantage and option to enable us to be able to manage all the different obligations of our different needs and our different domains, right? I mean, I know just before this call, while I
Yeah.
was on a work call, I was listen only and I was folding laundry while I was doing
Yes.
it, right?
Yes.
I'm
I
very
agree.
open about like,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
multitasking constantly. This is how we get by. This is how
Yes.
we do it. But what can happen if we are too remote? if we are remote in a way that we're not engaging those connections, we're not continuously warming up our network, if others aren't aware of what we are doing, our accomplishments, the value that we're adding, then it's like out of sight, out of mind. And that
Mm,
can limit our career development. And there's more and more research coming out on this. So it's really up to every working mother to decide and make the choice themselves on those trade-offs, right? The advantages of remote and distant forms of work versus the potential disadvantages, especially long term, given one's career.
yeah.
And I don't think that either, completely on one side or the other are at all ever correct. And again, can change over time, but it's at least recognizing, again, like kind of being conscious and purposeful in how you make those choices over when and where and how you work, but also as you're doing so, ensuring that you're doing it in the right way. So, for example, when you if you are not working in person face to face, making sure that you schedule, one-on-one calls with either colleagues or, maybe former manager or network partners, mentors, so on. Making sure that you stay on people's radar screens, making sure you are not afraid to showcase your accomplishments. Because again, often women are reticent
I
to do
know.
so, but we need to no one's going to champion our work if we don't do it for us. And making sure that again, over time, that when there are face-to-face opportunities, that you take advantage of it when you're able to, and really maximize it by engaging and collaborating and really showing up and being present and engaging, so that you can make sure that again, like you're not forgotten about
Yeah,
and that
and that
you're
part
engaged.
feels good though. I mean, I think not forgetting that some of us, like, and I mean, I'm a people person as well, like showing up, being in a room with other colleagues, like, of course, having to get dressed and all that stuff is an extra step. But I also feel like you receive a lot from that we're
Yes.
missing out on.
Yes.
And you can get overwhelmed in, I'm just on a screen, and like that I love that encouragement to show up when you can, when it works. And sometimes it just doesn't. Like I've been in plenty of, pulling the trigger on when it doesn't work should also be okay. And being authentic about that. Like I respect that so much from my colleagues and partners and clients. But I will say some of that does not come without guilt. So I did want to, from either personal experience and in your research, like where has guilt come in and been a factor in how people have managed that? Because I do think that's something that generally moms carry more than dads. And, I really struggle personally, and I know a lot of the listeners probably do as well, with getting over that guilt. When the guilt on both sides, quite honestly, a guilt
Yes.
for not always being there for our families, and then the guilt that comes with not always being there for our colleagues.
Absolutely. And again, that's come out from my research during COVID, as well as my research on
Double
post
whammy.
reentry, right? Like you feel like so many expressions along the lines of, I feel like I'm failing at all of my jobs.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm failing as a mom. I'm failing as a lawyer, as an employee. And I'm giving so much of myself, and yet I'm not meeting these expectations anywhere. Just how difficult that is to reckon with. Um, I think that a lot of the women who are probably listening, or folks who are listening, will tend to be high achievers, overachievers. It's my personality. Like my son was just joking me this morning, "Mommy, you're like the girl in class who's always raising her hand." I was like, "Oh yeah, I was that girl. I still am
I
that
love
girl."
it. Right?
Uh,
Great.
like you see me, son.
Yeah.
This
Oh,
old man, he gets it. But the point is, like, we have those very high expectations for ourselves. We
yeah.
probably have higher expectations for ourselves in both our mom role and our work role than anyone else even
Yeah.
has for us.
100%.
And
Yeah.
so that came out a lot in the COVID data. I remember is like, it's me who's making these expectations, and it's
Yeah.
in the sometimes it can be externally imposed, but more often than not, right? It is we have this identity that we consider ourselves to be. We have a vision of who we believed ourselves to be, and when we don't match or meet those expectations, then we feel like we have failed. We feel
Yeah.
like we're not doing our best, and that's very frustrating. So okay, a couple of things is that one kind of solution that came out from our COVID data was really looking at how we can right size expectations, especially during, at the time, it was this COVID crisis. But I think to translate that out more broadly, it's whenever there is some kind of disruption, right? Which is happening
Yeah.
more and more these days. But it's
Yes.
like, if there's any kind of
Yeah.
disruption or change or whatever, manage your like right size your expectations,
Yeah.
right? Where can I give a little? Where can I give 80, 85% instead of 100%? And then the next step is, well, first of all, one immediate next step, which is communication, right? So if
Mhm.
you're gonna be
Yeah.
producing work or not showing up for the ball game or producing work
Right.
that's not
Right.
gonna quite meet the mark, you communicate about why, if
Yeah.
appropriate, right? And be transparent, communicate, da da da. So it's like you're being transparent about it all. So that's fair to your coworkers or your
Yeah.
significant others. But then this is the phrase I hope if you remember anything from this conversation, it's this: self-compassion.
Mm.
You need to forgive yourself. You need to
Ah,
have compassion for yourself.
yeah.
We moms, we tend to have compassion for everyone
Mm.
around us, right?
Mm.
But not ourselves.
Yeah.
We need to give ourselves a break. So please Google the term self compassion. There's great sites out there, there's great research out there, and use some of those best practices to engage in self compassion. Give yourself that break when you need it the most. And this at least gives you the best chance possible of not only right sizing expectations, but forgiving yourself and moving on proactively if you don't meet those
I
expectations.
love that. And I think is that I mean, those are some of the micro moves, right? That you were suggesting. And I think I love that terminology because that's a very safe idea for working moms. Micro moves. It's a little tiny little shift. That was brilliant. So I loved that because it was more palatable. It's not these things that you just shared aren't massive undertakings, but they will have massive impacts if you start taking them in tiny little chunks. And I think for exhausted and depleted parents and moms, like that's pretty much all we can take on. So I think that's a great suggestion just to look at one small thing that will align with being compassionate to yourself. And that's going to be different for all of us. But I think just picking one and being consistent, quite honestly, every day doing that for whatever it is to take a habit. I mean, like I actually over the summer was not moving my body at all. And I decided to walk 10,000 steps a day. And my husband, who's a teacher, was like, well, that'll be easy. I'm like, oh my God, that is not easy. Okay. But I've done, I'm 75 days in. I got an accountability partner and my kids got involved. And so it was like a double whammy of a compassionate thing I was doing for myself to move myself. But I've gotten the benefit of walking with each of my kids at different intervals of the day. And it's like a
Those
very
are
healing thing.
cool.
It's a possibility. Maybe even you do 5,000 or 1,000, but it's just like, it was a little thing that had such a big impact. And it's really like also been an opportunity to do something for myself. Like the kids are seeing you do something. And that's another thing. Even I love that about your son. I want to talk about that because the fact that he sees that means you're definitely doing something right. And I would love like how you've interacted with your kids, knowing all that you've learned to help
Yeah.
them bring into the knowing of what it's like to be a mom and that it isn't even like even you said earlier, like showing your work concept of like making sure everyone knows this is hard. But I also think
Yeah.
I've been applying that with my kids. Show them their work of being a mom also isn't magic. Is there any conversations that I know they're little, but still like that you've had with them that kind of give you hope that they're seeing you, in addition to being the girl in the front of the class, I guess.
Uh, I mean, and how many times as parents do we say to ourselves, like, someday you'll appreciate
Right?
this.
I
Someday you'll
know.
appreciate driving back and forth to all these
Oh,
these sports and hobbies and this and that. No, I think that we can only hope, right?
yeah,
Someday we'll be able to.
I'm still hopeful. I'm not giving up on that.
I think along the way, I've definitely shifted in how I talk about my job with them.
Mm,
And I think, going back to Carrie, something you mentioned earlier, which I so agree with, and that's like I am a better mom
mm,
because of my role and my identity and my job as a professor. Because that helps me be the best version of myself. Like I've worked a hell of a long time to get to where I
yeah.
am. I have
Yeah.
invested so much for all these degrees and this work experience and this and that. And I remember another flashbulb moment, right? During COVID, like the peak of the lockdown when no one could come in or out and everything was at home. And I remember thinking, I have my PhD and all I do is the dishes. this, this,
I love
this
that.
is where I'm
Everybody can
putting
relate
all
to
my,
that. Yeah, everyone can relate to that. It's amazing.
right?
Yeah.
All I do is the dishes. And it's like a very privileged thing, by the way, to be able to have other people help. But that's another quick
Oh,
tip is like anything
oh,
that you're doing that you don't have to do, think about
oh.
outsourcing. Because
I
that money you spend outsourcing is probably worth the time that you will gain back, whether it goes to yourself or your job or your kids, your partner or whatever. but outsource that work because it is not
It,
worth your time.
it's so true.
Um, but yeah, I think I talk about my job differently. I do my job differently in front of them. I try to be visible with certain things. Like I try to read more hard copy and hard paper documents
Oh,
instead
that's
of being
good.
on a computer screen when I do need to work in front of them whenever I
That's
can, just
good.
to signal like life isn't just about being on a screen. I try to talk to them about the things I do in my job because they don't see it a lot. Like if I'm
Yeah.
teaching in the classroom or if I'm working on my research or some paper got published or whatever, it's like they don't necessarily see that. So I try to
Right.
talk about it so that they get a sense for what I do and why I do it and why I love it and why I care about it. Um, but then I think the flip side of that is that I really try to make my time with them very intentional. And
Yeah.
like when I'm with them, I'm with them. That
Yes.
was something that came out from the COVID data also, is that many moms kind of lamented about how I used to be able to separate my job from my kids, and I would go to work, and when I was home I was with them.
So
And then
hard.
post COVID, and especially when remote work became more of the norm and continued with such prominence, it was I'm constantly back and forth, and I've got my laptop in one hand and I'm nursing in the other, or I've
Yeah.
got my kids playing and I'm on my laptop in front of them. And it's like my relationship with them and my time with them became different because it was always kind of split.
Yeah.
So I think that's another consideration really that we can make those choices purposefully with like, okay, do I need to integrate in this moment, which that
Right.
very well may be the case, may be comfortable for some people. But when I can, like that should at least be a choice made purposefully because there is an impact to that. The kids see you
Right.
differently and experience
Totally.
their time with you differently when they see you on a screen. They know you're distracted, right? They are
Right.
smarter than we ever think they are. They get it. They see that you're not paying attention to them. And so by really immersing yourself in those precious moments with them,
I
it
know.
really you soak in that time with them such that when you do get back to your job, you're really that much
You're
more refreshed
full.
and ready to work.
Totally. I love that. I mean, one someone suggested, when my kids were little and I would take them to the park and I'd have my phone. And someone would text or email or whatever, I'd pay attention. And one of the best advice, and I don't even remember, it might have been some person at the park, was, "Do you really need your phone for 15 minutes?" And I was like, "Wow." So from then on,
Ooh,
I
shame
got
on you.
shamed, I got super shamed, but honestly, from then on, I put left the phone in the car and I'd be swinging, I would just
Yeah.
the experience was different. It was still 15 minutes. In my line of business, there's not an emergency in every 15 minutes, and just encouraging myself and the women that work with me to also be able to
Yeah.
be present. That is like, because it does go by so fast. Like what I also the span of your career is 30, 40 years. The span of real, like, in the weeds parenting is so short. And
Yes.
like I don't want to do it in a way that I regret the choices I made. And I don't know if that theme has ever weaved its way into your research, but I would love to kind of hear how people have overcome that regret.
Yeah, I think that's inevitable. The mom guilt is inevitable. The intent, something we haven't talked about yet, but the intensive parenting
Yes, yes, yeah.
expectations, right?
Oh,
It's not only self expectations, but it's the intensive parent
oh,
social implication expectations, which are hard, if not impossible to meet.
so
And so I think that, what's really come out of it from what I've seen is that, again, it's one of those things that it's not a final destination of perfect. I have, met these expectations and I'm the perfect mom who's always gonna be available to her kids while also being the perfect employee. But through the day-to-day moments, as you mentioned, right? Kind of like the small things, the small choices you can make day to day. It's about having reminders in place or making different decisions. Yes, like even just very tactically, like putting my phone away and not having it in front of me, which by the way, there's research that shows when your phone is within your eye, when your phone is visible to you, it's distracting you. It's eating a part of your attention because you're cognitively a part of your cognitive processing is wondering what's happening on that phone, even if the
wow.
screen is turned down.
Okay, that's
Fascinating, right?
that's very
So
innovative.
have that aside.
You just
Even
changed my
during
life.
a
Okay.
breastfeeding, have that aside because it's distracting you. It's that
Yeah.
powerful. But then I also really like having limits on like using kind of the different apps and things that can set limits on things. And so that is a good
Smart.
reminder to me to get off when I have certain special minutes. So for example, like if there's an app that you like to use, whether it's a social media one or a game or whatever, think to yourself, what is my choice for how many minutes per day I would ideally want to spend on this app, right? Maybe it's
Hmm.
15, maybe it's 60, whatever it is. What's your limit? and then set that limit using the timer functionality or whatever. And then when that notification pops up, up
Wow,
your time, you've reached your time
that's
limit, then you can make
great.
the purposeful choice. Do I want to do more of
Okay.
this? Or, hey,
Yeah.
it's been 15 minutes. I don't need to spend more than 15 minutes on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. I'm going to go do
Yeah.
something
Oh,
else
good.
now.
I love this. Okay, that's a really I've never heard of that. That's a great feature.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And then I totally agree. Like, it's so important that your kids are seeing everything. You're setting such impressions for them. You're normalizing what my off work behavior looks like, or what should it be, how should a parent spend time with their kids? And so, for example, I've always been a reader, and I kind of went down when I got my PhD because I was doing so much reading for my job. I was like, oh, like leisure reading
gosh,
just like got to
yeah.
prioritize. And in the recent years, as I've been trying to encourage my kids to read more and more, I've really been trying to purposefully read in front of them. So it's almost like performative.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
just pull
great.
out a book, or I'll always have a book by me. So during my downtime, instead of grabbing my
Excellent.
phone, or
Yeah.
maybe I will for 5 minutes, but I'll set
Yeah,
some timer. Then it's like, okay, turn to the
that's
book now and
great.
read the book instead. So things like that, that I'm hoping to set the right impressions for them. And I'm not perfect in that, right? But
No, but these
that's
are
something
all good suggestions. There, and I think that's what like we're so hungry for. Like even like I still like I love that term micro moves. I don't know if you consider those micro moves, but just like these little shifts that would help us feel better, be more intentional and more present in a meaningful way during the time we actually have with our kids versus the it's chaos. I mean, and I will admit publicly as well, I am not perfect at this at all. It's absolute like insanity. And, as I have a 14, almost 13 and 11-year-old, it is just nonstop. And there's a lot of imperfectionism. I love this one woman when I was at a music class, like literally my kids were 3, 2, and 1. She leaned into me because it was chaos. They were all over the place. I don't even know what they were doing. She leaned in and said, what you're trying to do is actually impossible.
yes,
So
yes.
actually, I was so actually shamed by that, I never went back to that music class. I was, like,
Oh,
so embarrassed by the chaos, but that's kind of how it's been for the last, 10, 11 years, and everyone adjusts and does the best they can. I think that's the other part.
absolutely.
I would love if you, would share, just speaking to a woman who's at the beginning of this journey and maybe looking back at your own journey, which obviously took some twists and turns. Like, what do you think you would tell your younger self what
Yeah.
this was going to be like and kind of how to make it as joyful as possible?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you for asking that. I think, first of all, that phrase self-compassion comes up again, right? So
Yeah.
throughout, from beginning onward, just give yourself a break. Realize we are never going to meet those perfect expectations, especially the ones that we hold for
Yeah.
ourselves. So just know. I think part of that is recognizing when things are really out of whack. And sometimes we cannot be really consciously or explicitly aware. But when we are stressed
Mm.
and our bodies are feeling it and our bodies are keeping the score, when we start snapping at our partner, or maybe getting sick more often than we're
Yeah.
supposed to, or have more aches or pains than we're supposed to, like, that's your body, that's your mood telling you that something is not right. And so I've tried to remind myself more and more, like, I'm going to be grateful for that information
Yeah.
and use it to make a
Mm.
change.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm going off, if I'm just not myself, snapping at this, but that's telling me something.
Yeah.
I need to make a change. How and where can I make a change? And maybe it's little changes or a little change, but something needs to change. And we have to look at that as like information. Um, I would be better at inserting self-care
Yeah.
into my calendar and treating it like a meeting that cannot be changed.
Mm.
Like, you've got those meetings
Yes.
that, oh, you could wiggle that around.
Yeah.
You've got the meetings that you can't touch.
I
Treat your self-care
know.
like a meeting that cannot be touched.
That's a
And
great one. I did try that once, and I literally in my calendar every day put breathing between 2
oh,
2 and
yeah.
2:30, and then one of my colleagues said, "I see that you have breathing. Can I make schedule over that?" I'm like, "Honestly, I just need 10 minutes to have a cup of tea, and then we can chat." But it is a good idea. I should have been more adamant about that.
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
you
and
I wanna be
Mhm.
you've been amazing. I have one more sort of question, just to be sensitive to your time, and I so grateful for this conversation. But I wanted to know, in all the research that you've done, like what is giving you the most hope for the future of working moms?
Oh, love this. Thank you for ending on this. This is so great because this is my thing, right?
Okay.
All the stereotypes, with all this stigma, with all the assumption, with all the tough parts that we've talked about and that we all have experienced. It's like I still believe that there is reason to be optimistic,
Okay.
right? I still believe that we can help to shift this stereotype such that working moms aren't perceived as deficient or less than, but instead can be perceived as even more powerful and value add because of what they've been through. I will plug a quick book called
Yeah.
named Maternal Optimism by
Okay.
a author and friend, Dana Greenberg and Jamie Lash, some fantastic
Right.
scholars. Maternal Optimism is
Okay.
the title.
I'm writing this
But
down. I
there's
will link it.
evidence. Yeah, it's so good. There's evidence-based research supporting the gains and advantages that
Oh,
working mothers bring to their work roles and their companies and industries. The key is really support, right?
mhm.
They need the right kind of support at work from their organization or manager, coworkers. They also need the right support at home from
Yeah.
partner, family, or externally. But the point is, there is so much. So coming back to my research, right? What we weren't, my original co-author and I, what we weren't expecting from this data that we collected from several hundred academic working mothers were the advantages
Mhm.
that they gained and the skills and abilities and things that they gained, the ways that they were empowered, all these like kind of positive aspects of their return to work after maternity leave, becoming more efficient in how they did their jobs, how they viewed themselves, their
Mm.
confidence, self-esteem, their how they were motivated, the fulfillment when things did go well, right? A lot of times things did go well, but when
Yeah.
the things did go well, when they did achieve
Better.
success,
Yeah.
like the fulfillment from that, like I did it, I made it. The vision of their career, right? Having a more balanced perspective of what their jobs meant to them.
Mm.
The shifting of
Yes.
priorities that we talked about, setting example, being a role model for my children and for future generations, the connection to the next generation and what they're doing in their work. And then also so much, this is a whole stream of research on relational changes, right? How their
Mm.
relationships with others change because of their becoming a working mother. And also how they themselves describe themselves as becoming more passionate, more compassionate, more understanding, more nurturing, having more patience, like saying things like, I've practiced patience so often now with my toddler now, I
Yeah.
feel like I'm applying it to my coworkers better, right? Like,
I love that.
and
I
on
love
and on
that.
and on. So all that to say, and also think really tactically about the network. I mean, can we talk
Yeah.
about the network that
Oh
we
my
gain from
goodness.
preschool friends and families, elementary school, sports teams? Like your network blossoms when you have kids because of
Yeah.
all these other ways that you're connecting with different people that you wouldn't already have. So
Absolutely.
all that to say, I think there's more there,
I
right? Than
love
the
it. And
stereotypes
honestly, like
that
I will
are
say,
that's optimistic.
this is so helpful. And in launching this podcast with zero experience, except for that I'm a mom that works, like just being able to network with people like you, that you exist, that you've devoted your career to caring about these issues. Like I'm on behalf of all working women, I want to just say thank you. It is super meaningful. And it has been a true pleasure to talk to you today and learn more from you. And I can't wait to absorb all of this conversation and make some micro moves to make being a mom and a professional even more fun. So
Oh, thank you so
thank
much,
you so much.
Carrie.
This has been
We're
a
all in
true
this
pleasure.
together.
I know we certainly are, and I really appreciate you taking the time today. It means a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
You've been listening to The Mothers-in-Law with Carrie Fogliani. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found the insights and stories shared helpful as you navigate your own journey. I also hope that you enjoyed listening to my mother. Not that I always do. For more resources, to connect with the community, and to continue exploring how to align your personal and professional life, visit www.themothersinlaw.com. We appreciate you.